Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teachers and in Spectacles. In this video, we are going to be taking an in-depth look into the character of Gerald and what he represents. So let's get started.
Okay, so let's start with a little reminder of who Gerald Croft is and what he represents in an In Spectacles. Okay, so Gerald Croft is the young man that is marrying Sheila, and the play opens up on their engagement party. Unfortunately, he's also the young man that has been having sex with Daisy Renton at the same time during the summer for a few weeks, and so of course is embroiled in Daisy Renton, Eva Smith's suicide. He is upper class, so he is very much a sort of representative of the vices, the flaws, the sort of crimes, I suppose, the moral crimes of the upper class and the aristocracy. And I'm not going to lie to you, ladies and gents, I can't bear Gerald, and I'm going to explain why. Let's start off with our early depictions of the character. So as always, we'll just check that first stage direction. So Gerald Croft is an attractive chap, about 30, rather too manly to be a dandy, but very much the well-bred young man about town. Okay, so it's all quite positive, isn't it? It's giving us a little, oh, he feels quite current. He's a young man, even though he's 30, so he's older than Sheila, but there's this idea about Gerald being sort of in the middle somehow, the middle ground. But everything feels very positive. You know, he's attractive. We get this noun chap, which feels informal and chatty and friendly. And we learn that he is a young man about town. So that suggests that there's a sort of sense of fashion to him, but it can also mean that a sort of a confidence, a sort of swagger. And I think that that is actually quite key to Gerald's character, the way he perceives himself, the privilege that he has, the doors that his status opens. And on that note, let's talk about status, because Gerald is a social superior to the Burlings. We know this because at the engagement party, Burling references his parents, Sir George and Lady Croft. So Sheila is marrying up, just as Mr. Burling married up when he married Mrs. Burling. So the status of Gerald is important. And while we're on the subject of this family dynamic, let's talk about the early relationship of Gerald and Sheila. Again, at first, seemingly quite positive. So we have the moment where he produces the ring and you can see Sheila's excitement. Oh, Gerald, you've got it. Is it the one you wanted me to have? So there's this kind of, fresh excitement about their engagement. But notice, is it the one you wanted me to have? Not, is it the one that you thought I'd like the most, or is it the one that I wanted the most? It's the one that Gerald wants her to have. So that tells us immediately a little bit about their dynamic. We also learn that the relationship has had a little bit of an up and down because of all last summer when you never came near me and I wondered what had happened to you. And Gerald says, oh, well, I was awfully busy at the works, awfully busy. Absolutely. So we're like, oh, okay. Is he awfully busy? Well, obviously it turns out, yes, he was, but with another woman. So we're getting this little kind of hint of the negative side. But of course, Mrs. Burling just swipes that one away with, oh, don't be silly, Sheila. You've got to understand that men will ignore their wives. That's just part of the parcel. Whether or not Mrs. Burling can kind of understand what's going on, I'll leave you to decide. But really, if we look a little closer, there is a hint in Mr. Burling's speech that this love match is no love match. It's a business match. Your father and I have been friendly rivals in business for some time now, though Croft Limited are older and bigger than Burling and Company. And now you've brought us together, and perhaps we may look forward to the time when Crofts and Burlings are no longer competing, but are working together for lower costs and higher prices. So actually, this marriage is a union of two quite powerful families in the same industry. It's a contract. They're both getting something out of it. And I'm telling you now, it's not love. Romantic. That's my love heart. Okay, before we get into the story of his involvement with Daisy Renton, Eva Smith, I just want to draw your attention to one particular sentence. This is him talking to Sheila and trying to reassure her that I hadn't set eyes on the girl for at least 6 months. I don't come into this suicide business. The flippant, nonchalant nature that he describes Daisy Renton's death, I personally find sickening. It's this noun phrase here, this suicide business. It's so detached, it's so unsympathetic. It doesn't matter to him, it seems. Even the way that he refers to the girl, I hadn't set eyes on the girl for at least 6 months. It's distant. It doesn't matter to him that they had this relationship, that she was potentially in love with him. She is now simply the girl. So that gives us a little bit of a flavour of Gerald's sort of inherent character. It's push it away. It's distant. And actually, if you look at his whole attitude towards women, there's quite a lot of problematic behaviour. So look at the way that he sort of talks about and around Sheila, his wife-to-be. I think Miss Burling ought to be excused any more of this questioning. She's nothing more to tell you. She's had a long and exciting and tiring day. We were celebrating blah, 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 and now she's obviously had about as much as she can stand. Look at the way that the language used is reminiscent of Mr. and Mrs. Burling's language and how diminishing and patronising these adjectives are. She's had a long, exciting, tiring day. Just like Mr. and Mrs. Burling, he treats Sheila like a child. He completely and utterly diminishes her merit and her worth and her value. Very ironic, as she is the one that has got the most understanding and the most knowledge and the most kind of assertive power by the end of it than anyone. It also sounds like he doesn't want Sheila to have a voice. He tells the inspector in this declarative, she's nothing more to tell you. She doesn't have anything else to say. He is taking her voice away from her. So Gerald clearly does not value Sheila in any particular way. He doesn't value her ideas, attitudes, opinions. He doesn't value her voice, and he patronises her and talks about her as a child. Let's look at some other women. This is about being in the palace. He didn't propose to stay down there long because he hates those hard-eyed, dough-faced women. Oh, what a metaphor. How scathing the way that he reflects upon women's looks. Hard-eyed, dough-faced. These are the prostitutes in the palace bar. Now that tells us immediately that he spends time down there because he knows enough about them. But note the lack of sympathy with the adjective hard-eyed. Of course they've got hard eyes. They're living horrendous lives. What catches his eye, though, is the opposite. Very pretty, soft brown hair and big, dark eyes. What does he value in a woman? He values beauty, yeah, and silence. And that's what Daisy Renton looked like in that moment. You know, pretty, soft brown hair, big, dark eyes, and silent and vulnerable, because that makes him more masculine, more kind of strong. So Priestley is being quite careful to signpost what it is that he wants in a woman, you know, in this moment. The inspector asks, you know, she became your mistress. Again, look at this triad. She was young, pretty, warm-hearted. Yeah, again, all adjectives that suggest this kind of innocence and sweetness. And, oh, she was intensely grateful. Look at the hyphen here, this pause. So this is an addition to our listing. Intensely grateful. Note that adverb of manner, demonstrating just how grateful she was. He likes the feeling of power that comes with a woman needing him and being grateful. He became at once the most important person in her life. Do you understand? Sheila understands. I love this moment. I think Priestley uses the best metaphor here. Oh, you were the wonderful fairy prince. You must have adored it, General. You must have adored it, Gerald. The wonderful fairy prince. She points out that he is putting this beautiful gloss on what is actually a very sordid, manipulative situation. He is the wonderful fairy prince, and he agrees and says nearly any man would feel the same way. So that tells us something about the men that Gerald knows, and therefore it's that what Priestley is saying about the upper classes, this sin, this vice, this is what all men do. All men that Gerald knows. And now I want to talk about the actual meditation behind this moment, because he reveals that on the second date that he has with Daisy Renton, when he sees the appalling place she's living in, that this is why he puts her up in this nice little set of rooms he had. So his buddy Charlie Brunswick, he's gone off for 6 months and is like, oh, would you like my keys? Now, I wonder what a man like Gerald would need a set of keys for a nice little set of rooms, because he doesn't need them. So the only reason that he has those rooms to use if he wanted to was a woman. So there is no doubt that Gerald had planned to have a relationship with some form of woman, and along comes this young, vulnerable woman on the brink of prostitution, potentially, but with the charm of having soft eyes as opposed to hard eyes. He exploits a vulnerable woman for his own sexual gratification. What a prince. Now, just like with Eric, and certainly with Sheila, it's obvious. We've got this little moment where we're like, can they change? Can this be enough, to bring forward a change in behaviours? Priestley is asking the question, can the upper classes change? Can they actually start to take on more social responsibility? Gerald tells us that he's rather more upset by this business than he probably appears to be, and wants to be alone. Now, check out what Priestley's up to here. Look at all these hyphens. Suggesting hesitancy, suggesting maybe grief, maybe he's struggling to, get out his words. And he even addresses that, he's more upset than he appears to be. He still uses the euphemism of business, distancing himself again from the suicide. But he also makes reference, or just alludes, Priestley is alluding here to the kind of masculine stereotype, that stiff upper lip. And he's saying, actually, that I do have these feelings. So we get this moment where we're like, oh, yes. And if we're feeling hopeful about Eric, we've got the same kind of hope. Oh, maybe it's going to be okay. Maybe he, like Sheila, is going to change social responsibility, Priestley socialist ideologies. Nah, he'd not. Because when he goes out for that walk, what he does is he goes and finds a policeman, doesn't he? And asks, is there an Inspector Gould? Because what is more important to Gerald is covering up the scandal. That's what's more important. It's removing the scandal. So look at his celebration. We've no proof it was the same photograph, therefore no proof it was the same girl. Now take me. I never saw a photograph, remember. He caught me out by suddenly announcing that this girl changed her name to Daisy Renton. I gave myself away because I'd known a Daisy Renton. So look at the language choice here. He caught me out. He's saying the inspector tricked him. Now if the inspector tricked him, suddenly he doesn't have responsibility. Yeah? We've no proof it was the same photograph, no proof it was the same girl. Look at that little repetition, suggesting how kind of sure of himself he is. But he does admit that he'd known a Daisy Renton. So it doesn't take away from his behaviour. He still did all those things. He still exploited a vulnerable woman. He still cheated on Sheila. But it just doesn't matter to him because it's not a big deal in his mind if they're not the same girl. And look at this adverb of manner in Burling's response. eagerly. So he gives Burling like something to hold on to. Look at the repetition, but the addition here, there wasn't the slightest proof that this Daisy Renton was Eva Smith. Note that superlative, slightest. So suddenly it's like, well, what were we talking about? There's nothing, there's not a bit of proof, even though there are actually a lot of alarming similarities between Eva Smith's story and Daisy Renton's story. But no, apparently they only had his word for it. So he could have been lying all the time. So this is about covering up the truth, hiding scandal. That's the most important thing. So how do we read Gerald? I read him pretty badly, and I think it's all summed up in his last line of the play. Everything's all right now, Sheila, holding up the ring. What about this ring? That's maybe like 6 or 7 lines before the curtain goes down. Note the declarative nature. Everything is all right now. He is retelling the narrative. He is using his kind of status and power to say, it's done. It's wiped clean. And the expectation is, despite everything he's done, is that Sheila is going to hop back on board. What about this ring? What a nonchalant marriage proposal after you've cheated on your fiancé. But the point I'm making is that to Gerald, it doesn't matter. And that is why Gerald is a symbol of upper class or aristocratic moral kind of crimes. In some ways, Gerald is so much worse because he is the middle. Like I said before, you think, who is he going to be with? Is he going to be with the younger generation with the hopes of change, or is he going to be with the older generation? And we're kind of trying to find out where he sits. And by the end of the play, it is very clear that he is more like Mr. and Mrs. Burling than anyone else. And not only is it about his own kind of sense of flaws and crimes and sins, it's about the way that he is going to literally just cover them up. What a future Sheila would have with him. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for watching. Sorry, that was a bit of a ranty one, but Gerald makes me really angry. I think he makes me with Gerald and Mrs. Burling up there together. So tune in for the next one, which will be on Mrs. Burling. If you haven't subscribed, do click that button, because then you'll get a notification when it is ready and you can hear me rant about her too. Thanks so much for watching. Happy revising.